The rose. It is the flower on every anniversary card. The one folks reach for to say I love you, I'm sorry, or congratulations. Almost everyone thinks they know it. But the truth is, the word rose does not point to one plant at all. It points to a whole family of wildly different characters, some tough as nails, some fussy as a house cat, some with a story hiding behind their petals that you would never guess just by looking. So here is the real question worth sitting with. Out of all of them, which rose is the right one for your garden, and how much do you actually know about the ones you think you recognize? Start with the hybrid tea. This is the rose most people picture the moment they hear the word. One large, perfectly shaped bloom, high and full in the center, sitting alone at the top of a long, straight stem. It is the classic florist rose, the one in the dozen your sweetheart brings home. Elegant, formal, and a little bit proud of itself. But the most famous hybrid tea of all has a story that has almost nothing to do with romance. Its name is Peace, and it may be the best-selling rose the world has ever known. In 1939, a French rose breeder named Francis Mayland had a promising new seedling on his hands, just as the Nazis were about to invade France. Fearing his life's work would be lost, he rushed cuttings out of the country. According to the story told for generations, one parcel was slipped onto the last plane out of France inside a diplomatic bag and carried safely to a rose grower in Pennsylvania. The rose survived the war on foreign soil, and on April the 29th, 1945, the very same day Berlin fell to the Allies, that rose was publicly given its name in California. They called it Peace. Later that year, when the delegates gathered in San Francisco to found the United Nations, a single peace bloom was placed in the room of every delegation, with a note wishing for lasting peace in the world. Now, here is the honest part, friend to friend, before you fall in love. Hybrid teas are the divas of the rose world, gorgeous in a vase unmatched as a single-cut flower. But they ask for your attention. They want full sun, good air moving around them, and steady deadheading, and they catch leaf diseases more easily than the tougher roses. Plant one where you can pamper it, not where you want it to fend for itself. And if you ever wonder where the modern rose truly begins, it begins here. The hybrid tea was born in 1867 from a single French seedling called La France. That one rose is the line in the sand that rose experts still use to divide the old garden roses of the past from all the modern roses that came after. Next comes the floribunda. If the hybrid tea is the rose in the fancy florist's box, the floribunda is the rose you have seen 1,000 times without ever knowing its name. It is the one planted in big, cheerful drifts outside shopping centers, along sidewalks, and in city flower beds. The blooms are a little smaller, but instead of one flower on a stem, you get whole clusters of them, bunched together and covered in color from early summer all the way to the first frost. Here is the surprising part. This rose did not happen by accident in the wild. Someone sat down and invented it on purpose. Early in the 20th century, a Danish breeder named Poulsen had a simple, clever idea. He took the elegant hybrid tea, with its beautiful shape and wide range of colors, and crossed it with a tougher little rose called the polyantha, which was famous for blooming in generous clusters. His goal was to get the beauty of the one and the sheer abundance of the other in a single plant. It worked. The name they eventually gave this new group says it all. Floribunda comes from Latin, and it means flowering in abundance. And that is exactly why it belongs in so many gardens, especially if roses feel intimidating to you. This is honestly the friendliest rose to start with. It gives you more flowers for less fuss than almost any other kind. It is bushier and hardier than the fussy hybrid tea. It shrugs off disease more easily, and it does not need the same careful pampering. Plant it in full sun where you want a long, dependable wave of color, along a path as a low hedge or filling a bed, and it will reward you month after month. There is one small trick worth knowing, the kind a neighbor passes over the fence. When the flowers in a cluster fade, snip off the whole spent bunch rather than hunting for a single bud lower down. Clearing the entire cluster tells the plant to get right back to work, and it will send up fresh blooms faster. It is a tiny habit, but it is the quiet difference between a rose that pauses and a rose that keeps on giving all season long. The damask. If a rose has ever stopped you in your tracks with its scent, this is very likely the one you smelled, or one of its children. The damask rose is the source of that deep, old-fashioned rose perfume, the smell in rosewater, in fine soaps, and in the little bottles on your grandmother's dresser. Soft pink, ruffled, and heavy with fragrance, it has been loved for its scent for over 1,000 years. But here is what almost no one realizes when they breathe it in. That scent is one of the most expensive things a garden can produce. It takes somewhere between 3 and 4 tons of hand-picked damask petals to make just 1 single pound of pure rose oil. That is why perfumers have long called it liquid gold, and there is a reason the work starts so early. Out in the great rose fields, the pickers are bent over the bushes at dawn, racing the sun, because the fragrant oils sit strongest in the cool morning petals and begin to fade the moment the day warms up. By mid-morning, the picking is done. Now, an honest word before you plant one, so you are not disappointed. Do not grow the damask for a big, showy display. Grow it for its soul, which is that fragrance. Most damasks bloom only once a year, in early summer, in one generous, glorious flush, and then they are done. The bushes are a little loose and arching rather than tidy. They are hardy and easygoing, and the smartest place for one is right where you will walk past it every day, beside a door, along a path, or under a window, so that scent reaches out and stops you the way it has stopped people for centuries. And the story in that perfume is still being written today. Most of the world's rose oil comes from just 2 places that have made it their heritage: the Rose Valley around Kazanlak in Bulgaria and the Isparta region of Turkey, a town so devoted to this one flower that people call it the City of Roses. The miniature. Everyone has seen this one, even if they never gave it a name. It is the tiny rose in a little plastic pot by the grocery store checkout, or lined up at the garden center, barely taller than your hand, covered in perfect small blooms that look like someone shrank a full-sized rose down to doll size. Most folks treat it as a cute impulse buy, half plant and half gift. But do not let the size fool you. A miniature is a real, true rose, hardy and tough, not some delicate novelty. And one of them has done something no other rose in your garden can claim. It has been to outer space. In October of 1998, a fragrant little miniature named Overnight Sensation flew aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery. It was chosen for a simple, lovely reason: that it was small enough to fit in the growing chamber, and unlike most miniatures, it actually had a strong scent. Up there, with no gravity, scientists studied how its perfume changed, and the discovery was real. The rose smelled different in space, and perfume makers back on Earth turned that finding into a brand new fragrance note. Now, here is where a friend saves you some heartburn. These little roses are outdoor plants at heart. The ones sold at the checkout are often treated as throwaway houseplants, kept on a windowsill until they sulk and fade. Give one what it truly wants instead: a spot outdoors in full sun, in a pot on the balcony, along the edge of a bed, or by the steps, and never let that small pot dry out, because little containers lose their water fast. Treated right, a miniature will bloom again and again all season, just like its big cousins. So the next time you pass that rack of tiny roses by the register, you can smile knowing the truth. That is not a disposable trinket in your hand. That is a full member of the rose family, shrunk down small enough to sit on a table and tough enough to have ridden a rocket. The English rose. Look at the roses filling wedding bouquets and gardening magazines today. The big romantic ones, packed with dozens of soft petals folded into a deep cup, spilling out that old-fashioned perfume. These are English roses, and they feel like something handed down from 100 years ago. So here is the part that surprises almost everyone. This whole beloved group is barely 60 years old, and when it was born, the experts wanted nothing to do with it. It began with one determined man named David Austin, working on a farm in the English countryside. He loved the antique roses of the past for their fragrance and charm, but those old roses had a flaw. Most of them bloomed only once a year and then quit. Austen had a dream to marry the romance of the old roses with the modern gift of blooming again and again all season. In 1961, he released his very first rose, called Constant Spry, and the rose industry turned up its nose. They called his flowers old-fashioned. Nurseries flat out refused to stock them. So Austen, undaunted, sold his roses himself, packing them up and shipping them straight from his own kitchen table. By 1969, he had cracked it, and the first repeat flowering English roses were born. For a real garden, this is why they have become such a smart, happy choice. An English rose gives you the best of both worlds, the lush, fragrant, antique look you fall in love with, but with modern manners, blooming from early summer into fall instead of vanishing after one show, and generally shrugging off disease better than the fussy old types. Give one full sun and rich, well-fed soil, tuck it into a mixed border or a bed near where you sit, and it will reward you gently over and over. And there is one lovely detail worth passing along. Austen named his creations English roses partly out of quiet national pride. He figured the French had long claimed their Gallica roses, and the Scots had their own, so surely England, a country that has woven the rose through its whole history, deserved a signature rose to call its own. The climbing rose. Picture the perfect cottage. There is almost always a rose spilling over the doorway, framing an arch, or climbing up the front of the house in a wall of color. That is the picture in everyone's mind, a rose that reaches for the sky. And here is the quiet secret hiding inside that picture. Climbing roses cannot actually climb, not on their own. Think about how ivy or a grapevine works. They have little grabbers, tendrils, and suckers that reach out and grip whatever they touch, hauling the plant upward all by itself. A climbing rose has none of that. It has no way to hold on at all. In the wild, what looks like climbing is really just scrambling. The rose throws out long, whippy canes and hooks them over nearby shrubs with its thorns, using its neighbors as a leaning post. In your garden, that job falls to you. Every single cane has to be tied to its support by hand, or it will simply flop back down to the ground. Now here is the one trick that changes everything, the thing that separates a bare pole with a few sad flowers at the very top from a true wall of blooms. When you tie up those main canes, train them sideways, as close to horizontal as you can, instead of straight up. It seems backward, but it works because of how the rose flows its energy. A cane pointed straight up tends to bloom only at its tip. Bend that same cane over sideways, and it wakes up buds all along its length, sending out flowering side shoots the whole way down. Point the cane sideways, and you get flowers everywhere. Give one a sunny wall, a fence, an arch, or a sturdy pillar, and guide it patiently. And one last thing worth knowing, so you are not confused at the garden center. Many climbers are what growers call sports, a happy natural accident. A favorite bush rose will now and then throw out one branch that suddenly wants to grow tall. And from that single climbing branch, a whole climbing version of the rose is born. The climber and the bush can be the very same rose. One of them simply decided to reach higher. The rambler. Almost everyone has seen one, usually at an old house or a grandmother's place. It is that rose gone gloriously wild, the one that swallows a whole shed, tumbles over a fence, or climbs right up into an old tree in a foaming cloud of hundreds of tiny flowers. It looks less like a planted rose and more like a force of nature that simply moved in. And that is exactly what makes the rambler capable of something almost unbelievable. The largest rose bush in the entire world is a single rambler, and it grows in the unlikeliest place you could imagine, the dusty old mining town of Tombstone, Arizona. It was planted back in 1885 from a cutting mailed across the ocean to a homesick young Scottish bride. From that one small slip of a plant, it has grown for well over a century into a living giant that now covers around 8,000 square feet, close to a fifth of an acre. Its trunk is about 12 feet around. Its branches are held up by a huge trellis you can walk beneath, and every spring it blooms in a blanket of white flowers that smell oddly and wonderfully like violets. So here is the honest, friendly warning, because that same power is the whole point and the whole danger. A rambler is for covering something big and unlovely, an ugly fence, a dead tree, a long boundary wall. It is not for a small, tidy garden where it will happily eat everything in reach. Most ramblers bloom just once a year, but oh, what a show it is. And remember this one thing above all, because it trips up so many people. A rambler flowers on old wood, meaning the canes it grew the year before. So you prune it right after it finishes blooming, never in winter. Snip at the wrong time, and you will cut off every single flower for next year. And there is a lovely thread running through that giant in the desert. That famous tombstone rose is a Lady Banks rose, a kind first carried out of a nursery in China and brought to the West in the early 1800s. A gift between two homesick friends became the biggest rose on earth. The wild rose. This is the one that started it all. Long before anyone bred a fancy florist rose or a plump English bloom, there was just this. The simple wild rose you still see today, scrambling along country roadsides and tumbling through hedges. 5 plain petals, usually soft pink, open and honest, with a little cluster of golden stamens in the middle. It looks almost too humble to be a rose, but this is the original, the ancestor. And here's the beautiful truth. Every single rose you have met so far, the proud hybrid tea, the fragrant damask, the giant rambler, all of them trace back to plain wild roses like this one. But the wild rose kept a gift the fancy ones mostly gave up. After it flowers, it forms a fruit called a rose hip, and that little hip is a quiet powerhouse. Weight for weight, it can carry around 20 times the vitamin C of an orange. That fact once mattered enormously. During the Second World War, when Britain could no longer get oranges shipped in, the government sent volunteers, including school children, out into the hedgerows to gather wild rose hips by the ton, boiling them down into a national rose hip syrup handed out to keep the country's children healthy. Now, a gentle and important word before anyone goes foraging. The soft outer flesh of the hip is safe and edible, and every part of a true rose is non-toxic. But hiding inside that hip are fine, prickly hairs around the seeds, and those hairs are a real irritant to your insides. Children once used them as itching powder, so you always strain them out completely before eating. And only ever pick from bushes you know have not been sprayed. Beyond that, this is the toughest, most generous rose there is. Wonderful for a wild hedge or a low-care corner, feeding the birds all winter long and asking almost nothing of you in return. And here is the thought to carry with you, the one that reveals just how big this family really is. The rose is not alone. Apples, pears, strawberries, cherries, plums, peaches, even almonds, all of them belong to the very same family as the rose. That blossom on an apple tree in spring is, in truth, a cousin of the rose. You have known this flower your whole life. You just never knew how large and how generous its family truly was. Thank you for watching. If you want another story right now, there is one waiting for you on your screen. And if you enjoyed this one, subscribe so you never miss the next.